All right, so today we're going to be diving deep into the world of Andrew Jackson.
Oh, yeah.
A man who went from war hero
Mm.
to plantation owner
Yeah.
to eventually president of the United States.
Yeah.
His life, I mean, talk about just full of duels and political battles and even a love story with a twist. It's crazy. It almost sounds like it's straight out of a movie,
Yeah, yeah.
And we're going to be using excerpts from the American History Tellers podcast episode, Good Feelings, to help us understand this whole period, this age of Jackson.
Great.
And it's just fascinating how different politics were back then.
Yeah, yeah.
It's really interesting.
It really is. I mean, what I think is so intriguing about this whole period is how American politics transformed, like, during Jackson's lifetime, basically. We're going to see the fall of one political system and then the rise of another.
Yeah.
And Jackson is, like, right there in the middle of it all.
It's wild, yeah. It almost sounds like he was destined for this role.
Yeah.
So to really kind of set the scene, let's start with 1817. Right?
Okay.
James Monroe is president.
Yeah.
The country is trying to, find its footing after the War of 1812.
Right.
Everyone's hoping for unity, which is why they call it the era of good feelings.
Yeah.
But was it all like a facade? I mean, was it really all good?
Well, I mean, it's true that, like, under the surface of all this unity, there were these, like, deep tensions brewing. And one example is, like, the Federalist Party.
Yeah.
They opposed the War of 1812.
Yeah.
And they were already, like, struggling.
Okay.
And then they have this Hartford Convention.
Yeah.
And their demands at that convention, I mean, some of them were even suggesting that, like, New England should secede from the United States.
Yeah.
It made them look like really unpatriotic.
Right.
And then on top of that, Andrew Jackson has this big victory at the Battle of New Orleans.
Yeah.
And that just, like, further diminishes their standing.
Uh-huh.
It was a blow they couldn't recover from.
Yeah, that's right. That victory really, propelled Jackson onto the national stage, didn't it?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But then, just a couple of years later, all those, good feelings that everyone was talking about totally evaporated.
Yeah.
1819, Missouri applies for statehood, and everything just erupts into this chaos, right?
Right.
What happened?
So the Missouri Compromise, I think, is, like, essential to understanding how we got to the Civil War, basically.
Okay.
Missouri wanted to enter as a slave state.
Yeah.
And that just, like, sparked this huge debate.
Right.
And Northerners, they were, like, totally opposed to the expansion of slavery.
Yeah.
I mean, not just on, like, moral grounds, but also because it threatened to shift the balance of power in favor of the South.
Whoa. So it wasn't just about,
the
morals. It was also about power.
Absolutely. It was about, like, the whole future of the country, really.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and the debates in Congress, they were super heated.
Yeah.
Like, some politicians, they were even warning that the Union was going to dissolve over this issue.
Over this one state?
Yeah. It was that serious.
Yeah.
And then in the end, they have this Missouri Compromise, which admitted Maine as a free state, and then drew this line across the Louisiana Purchase to try to limit the spread of slavery.
Yeah.
But really, all it did was just postpone the conflict, Right. They never actually resolved the, like, fundamental issue of slavery.
So the Missouri Compromise was basically like a Band-Aid.
Yeah, exactly. Just a temporary fix.
On a much deeper wound.
Yeah, yeah.
So where was Andrew Jackson during all of this?
Well, that's a good question. So in the 1810s, Jackson was back in Tennessee, dealing with some health problems, expanding his plantation.
Okay.
And then this is really important.
Yeah.
So while he's being hailed as this national hero, right?
Yeah.
The number of people he enslaved actually doubled during this time.
Wow. So on one hand, he's, fighting for liberty, but on the other hand, he's profiting from the enslavement of others.
It's a big contradiction, right? And it really highlights the complexity of his character and of the time he was living in.
Right.
He really embodies the contradictions of that whole era.
It's wild.
Yeah.
And the sources also reveal this really interesting detail about Jackson around this time.
Oh, yeah.
So he's tasked with taking control of Florida from Spain in 1821.
Okay.
And we had these charming letters from his wife, Rachel, who absolutely loved Pensacola.
Really?
She described it as a paradise.
Wow.
But even with this exciting development, right?
Yeah.
Jackson was still just insistent on retiring from public life.
Yeah, he really thought his time in the public eye was over.
It's crazy, yeah.
Yeah, he just wanted that quiet life on his plantation,
Yeah, yeah.
But, like we know, fate had other plans. The Panic of 1819 would end up really paving the way for Jackson's rise to power.
Okay, remind me about the Panic of 1819.
Okay.
What happened and how did it impact Jackson's future?
Okay, so it was this major economic crisis, and it was triggered by these risky loans
Uh-huh.
and the Second Bank of the United States demanding repayment, which led to widespread foreclosures.
Okay.
And Jackson, he blamed the bank
Okay.
completely.
Really?
Yeah, and this would become a central theme in his political ideology.
So this is where he's really starting to develop those views on financial systems.
Yeah, absolutely. And his distrust of banks and his ability to connect with those who felt victimized by them, that became key to his appeal, I think. There's this great quote from Thomas Hart Benton, who was a senator at the time.
Okay.
And he captures the sentiment perfectly.
Okay.
He said, "The West is in the jaws of the monster, a lump of butter in the mouth of a dog."
Yeah.
Isn't that vivid?
Yeah, that's a crazy image.
It shows you how much people feared and hated the bank.
It sounds like the stage was set for his political career, even though he wanted to retire.
Exactly. He wanted that quiet life, but he just kept getting pulled back in.
Yeah.
He was drafted into the 1824 presidential race.
Wow, I imagine his supporters really saw him as a symbol of hope after that economic crisis.
They did. We actually have letters from Sam Houston.
Oh, wow.
Who would go on to lead Texas to independence, right?
Right.
And he was urging Jackson to run for president.
Wow.
He praised his heroism and emphasized his appeal to the common man.
He really was a reluctant candidate, but his popularity was undeniable.
Oh, absolutely. There was no stopping him at that point, really.
It sounds like he just couldn't escape destiny.
Yeah.
But the 1824 election wasn't smooth sailing, was it?
No, not at all. I mean, the 1824 election was crazy.
Yeah.
It was total chaos.
Yeah.
You had 4 major candidates battling for the presidency.
Right.
Each of them with their own regional base of support. It was a really close and contentious race.
And this is where the corrupt bargain comes in.
Right.
Which sounds like something straight out of a political thriller.
It really does.
Can you remind us what happened?
Sure. So Jackson, he actually won the popular vote.
Okay.
But he didn't get enough electoral votes to be president.
Okay.
So the decision went to the House of Representatives.
Right.
And there, another candidate, Henry Clay, threw his support behind John Quincy Adams.
So even though Jackson won the popular vote,
yeah,
she lost the election because of these backroom deals.
Exactly. Adams became president.
Wow.
And Jackson and his supporters felt completely cheated.
Right.
They accused Adams and Clay of this corrupt bargain to steal the election.
It's incredible.
Yeah, and this would fuel Jackson's determination for years to come.
Wow, talk about a political grudge match. So how did Jackson react to this? Did he just fade into the background?
No, Jackson was furious. He resigned from the Senate and went back to Tennessee.
Right.
But this is not the end of his story.
Okay.
His supporters were already mobilizing for a rematch in 1828.
Wow.
And a new era of American politics was about to begin.
That's where we'll pick up next time.
Sounds good.
So last time we left off with that cliffhanger.
Yeah.
The corrupt bargain of 1824 that left Andrew Jackson feeling, cheated out of the presidency.
Right.
His supporters were fired up.
Oh, yeah.
And the 1828 election was already looking like a big showdown.
It was.
What was different about this election compared to previous ones?
Well, the 1828 campaign, I think it really marked a significant shift in American politics.
Okay.
It was a much more participatory process with a larger electorate.
Okay.
More states involved.
Right.
Campaigns became louder, more aggressive.
Okay.
And really focused on mobilizing the masses.
Right.
I mean, this was really the birth of modern campaigning as we know it.
Wow.
With all the drama and spectacle.
Yeah, it sounds almost like a preview of today's political landscape where, emotions run high, things get really heated.
Absolutely.
Were there any key figures that emerged during this time who helped shape this new style of campaigning?
Yeah, so one really key figure was Martin Van Buren. He was this brilliant political strategist who became a close ally of Jackson.
Okay.
And Van Buren, he really understood how to, tap into this changing political landscape. He helped build this coalition of voters who felt ignored by the establishment, right? Yeah. Those who were angry about the Panic of 1819, who resented the elites and who yearned for like a president who truly represented the people.
So Van Buren was kind of like the campaign manager mastermind.
Yeah, he was like the brains behind the operation.
Behind Jackson's rise to power.
Yeah, exactly.
Did they use any like specific tactics that stand out?
Oh, yeah, for sure. They used like slogans and rallies. Okay. And they even created newspapers specifically for the campaign.
Wow.
Which was pretty new at the time.
Yeah, it was a far cry from the more subdued campaigns of the past.
Totally. This was like a whole new level.
Sounds like they were really pushing the boundaries of what a political campaign could be.
Yeah, they were really breaking new ground.
But the sources also mentioned that things got, like, pretty nasty during the 1828 election.
It got ugly.
Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. So the 1828 campaign was just, like, incredibly vicious, with, like, attacks on both candidates and their families. Wow, and this was a big contrast to earlier elections, where personal attacks were, like, taboo.
Right.
And it really foreshadowed the partisan bitterness and the divisive rhetoric that we still see in politics today.
It's almost like that election set a precedent for the kind of like negative campaigning we see even today.
Yeah, sadly it did in some ways.
Was there anything in particular that stood out as like especially brutal?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most heartbreaking things about that campaign was the way they attacked Jackson's wife, Rachel.
Oh, yeah.
You know, opponents dug up this, like, scandal from her first marriage.
Oh, wow.
They accused her of bigamy and adultery.
That's awful.
It was really cruel.
Yeah.
And it clearly took a toll on her health.
It's hard to even imagine what kind of stress she must have been under.
Yeah, it must have been terrible.
Did Jackson ever address these attacks?
Yeah, he did. You know, we have letters from Jackson where he expresses his anguish and fury over how Rachel was treated. And he swore he would never forgive those who slandered her.
Wow.
It really, really affected him.
Yeah. And
many believe that he carried this bitterness into his presidency.
It sounds like this personal tragedy just cast a long shadow over his whole time in office.
Yeah, it did.
Did Rachel live to see Jackson become president?
No, sadly, she didn't. She died just weeks before Jackson's inauguration in December 1828.
Wow.
And many believe the stress of the campaign contributed to her death.
It's a tragic story.
It is.
It must have been a very somber inauguration.
Yeah, it was a mix of emotions, for sure. Yeah. You know, you had Jackson supporters who flooded Washington to celebrate their victory. You know, they represented this like new wave in American politics, the rise of the common man.
Right.
But at the same time, you had the elites who were scared of what Jackson's presidency might bring.
So it was this clash of cultures.
Exactly. Old versus new.
What was the atmosphere like?
Well, imagine like this rowdy crowd of Jackson's supporters, many from like rural areas descending on like the polished halls of Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
One observer described it as feeling like the northern barbarians had invaded Rome.
Wow.
You know, they saw Jackson and his supporters as like a threat to the established order, this like populist uprising that could like upend everything they held dear.
It must have been quite a sight to behold.
It was.
So here you have Andrew Jackson, the war hero, the grieving husband, the vengeful spirit, about to become the most powerful man in America.
It's incredible.
What kind of president would he be?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right.
Jackson was like a man of contradictions, this complex figure who really embodied the spirit of his time. Yeah. Would he be a force for good, or would he unleash chaos on the nation?
It's amazing how much his personal life seems to have affected like his political one.
Yeah, it's all intertwined, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Well, this is where things start to get really interesting.
Yeah.
We've explored Jackson's journey to the presidency, the political climate, the personal tragedies that shaped him.
Right.
And now we're about to witness how it all unfolds in the Oval Office.
It's going to be a wild ride.
Yeah. So before we dive into Jackson's presidency, I'm curious, what's struck you the most so far?
Okay.
What stood out to you about his story and the political landscape of that era?
Well, I think what fascinates me the most is how Jackson's rise coincided with, like, the expansion of democracy in America.
Yeah.
You know, more people were eligible to vote, and they were looking for someone who represented their interests,
right,
who understood their struggles.
Yeah.
And Jackson, with his humble origins,
right,
his image as like a man of the people, he perfectly embodied this new era. But at the same time, you know, he was a slave owner who benefited from the very system that denied freedom to so many.
It's wild. It's hard to wrap your head around it.
It is. It's this inherent contradiction that's like at the heart of his story and makes him such a compelling figure to study.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
He was both a symbol of progress and a reminder of the deep inequalities that plagued American society.
Yeah.
And I'm sure his presidency is going to reveal even more about this complex and contradictory man.
For sure. His actions in office, both the positive and the negative, you know, had like far-reaching consequences that we're still dealing with today.
Well, I can't wait to dive into all of that. All right, so we've talked about a lot: duels, the corrupt bargain, expanding democracy, you know, the tragic loss of Rachel Donaldson.
So a lot.
It's been quite a journey.
Yeah.
Now it's time to really unpack what Jackson did as president.
Yeah.
Where do we even begin?
Well, Jackson's presidency was just tons of stuff happened.
Yeah.
But I think maybe the most impactful and controversial was his approach to Native American policy.
Okay.
Jackson firmly believed that Native Americans should be removed from their lands east of the Mississippi and relocated west, which would open up, you know, all this territory for white settlement.
But this wasn't just about like land, right? There was also this idea of civilizing Native Americans by forcing them to assimilate.
Exactly.
What was the thinking behind that?
Yeah, so it was this like really paternalistic and ultimately harmful approach that was rooted in the belief that, you know, European American culture was superior, and this like ideology led to one of the darkest chapters in American history, the Trail of Tears.
Trail of Tears, That name alone just evokes so much sadness.
It does.
Can you remind us what happened?
Sure. So in 1838, thousands of Cherokee people were forcibly removed from their homes in Georgia and marched like hundreds of miles to Oklahoma. Yeah. And thousands died along the way from disease, starvation, exposure.
It's just awful.
Yeah, it was a brutal and inhumane policy. A devastating consequence of Jackson's vision for westward expansion.
It's a truly horrific event.
It is.
How could this have happened in a country that supposedly valued liberty and justice?
It's a question that still haunts us, right?
Yeah.
It exposes the like hypocrisy at the heart of American history.
Yeah.
You know, the clash between ideals and actions.
Right. Yeah.
The gap between rhetoric and reality.
Yeah, it's a really sobering reminder that progress isn't always, you know, this straight line.
Right.
And even the figures that we might admire can have these really flawed legacies.
For sure.
Okay, so besides Native American removal, what else kind of defined Jackson's presidency?
Well, remember how he blamed the Second Bank of the United States for the Panic of 1819?
Right. He saw the bank as this, like, elitist institution, a threat to the common man.
Exactly.
What did he do about it?
Well, as president, he just, like, doubled down on that fight.
Okay.
So in 1832, he vetoed the bill to recharter the bank. And then in 1833, he ordered the removal of all federal funds from the bank and put them in state banks instead.
That's a bold move.
It was a radical move and super controversial.
Yeah.
It led to like some economic instability for a while, and some argue that it actually made the downturn worse.
Really?
Yeah. But for Jackson, this was a victory against what he saw as like this corrupt and undemocratic institution.
So it's really interesting how like his personal experiences, you know, the Panic of 1819, really directly shaped his policies as president. Absolutely.
Like his distrust of central banking, that was deep. You know, it was personal and political.
Right.
It became a defining characteristic of his presidency.
And this theme of Jackson taking on these powerful institutions continued in another major event.
Yeah.
The nullification crisis of 1832.
Oh, yeah. The nullification crisis. That was a close one.
Yeah. This one almost tore the country apart, right?
It could have.
Remind us what that was all about.
Okay. So it was this like constitutional showdown between the federal government and the state of South Carolina.
Okay.
And the issue was tariffs.
Okay, tariffs. Those are the taxes.
Right. Taxes on imported goods that protected northern industries but hurt southern planters.
So South Carolina felt like the tariffs were, like, unfair.
Totally. They thought they were overstepping the federal government's power.
What did they do about it?
Well, they took a radical stance. They declared the tariffs null and void in South Carolina.
Whoa.
And threatened to secede from the Union if the government tried to enforce them.
That's a huge gamble. They were basically daring Jackson to make a move.
Yeah, they were.
How did he respond?
Well, Jackson was not one to back down.
Right.
He threatened to use military force to make South Carolina obey federal law.
So he was serious.
Yeah. And he even issued a proclamation denouncing nullification as treason.
That's some serious tough talk.
It was.
Was he bluffing?
It's hard to say.
Yeah.
But Jackson had a reputation for being decisive, even ruthless.
Right.
I think he was prepared to do whatever it took to preserve the Union.
So it's a high-stakes poker game.
Yeah, for sure. What happened? Well, luckily, cooler heads prevailed.
Okay.
They reached a compromise.
Okay.
The tariff was reduced.
Yeah.
South Carolina backed down from secession.
Okay.
But the nullification crisis, really showed these deep divisions in the country over states' rights, federal power, and the question of slavery, which was, always looming.
It was like a preview of the conflicts that would lead to the Civil War.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it sounds like Jackson's presidency was just this roller coaster of dramatic events and political battles.
It was a wild ride.
Beyond the specifics, is there a bigger takeaway? How would you summarize his overall impact on the presidency?
I think, maybe the biggest thing is that Jackson expanded the power of the executive branch. He believed in a strong presidency, one that represented the will of the people.
Right, not just the elite.
Exactly, and he wasn't afraid to use that power to get things done.
He was a true populist leader.
He was.
For better or for worse.
Yeah, I mean, that's always the question, right? Yeah. Expanding presidential power it's a double-edged sword.
It is.
On the one hand, it can be good, right?
Yeah.
You get decisive action, more responsive government.
Right.
But it can also lead to, abuses of power and a weakening of checks and balances.
Yeah, those are questions we're still grappling with today.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's amazing how these issues from Jackson's time are still relevant today.
It's
federal power, states' rights, the role of the presidency.
It's crazy.
These are fundamental questions about American democracy.
It seems like every generation has to wrestle with them in their own way.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
It's wild.
History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Right?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
And I think studying figures like Andrew Jackson helps us understand the complexities of our own time.
Yeah, for sure. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Andrew Jackson, what's the one key takeaway you want our listener to remember?
Okay, well, I think Jackson's presidency was a real turning point in American history.
For sure.
He was a complex and contradictory figure, a war hero, a slave owner, a champion of the common man, a ruthless politician.
A lot of things wrapped up in one person.
He was. He expanded democracy while also perpetuating injustice.
Yeah.
He left behind this mixed legacy of progress and pain.
He was a man of his time, but his actions still shape ours.
Exactly. And I think ultimately, studying his life and his presidency isn't just about learning facts and dates, Right. It's about, engaging with the ongoing story of America, understanding its complexities and contradictions, and reflecting on what it means to be a citizen in a nation that's still trying to live up to its ideals.
That's it. That's a powerful message.
Yeah.
And as always, there's just, so much more to learn, to explore, to question.
Oh, always.
I hope this deep dive has sparked a curiosity in our listener to keep digging, to keep peeling back those layers of history and to draw their own conclusions.
Yeah, I mean, engaging with history is a lifelong journey, right?
It is.
And every discovery leads to new insights and perspectives, and who knows, maybe our listener will uncover something that we missed.
That's what makes it so exciting.
Exactly.
Until next time, keep exploring.
Keep learning.